Hey, everybody, and welcome to the brand called you. So, listen, I always think that you can be disenchanted in your life, and then there's this one pivotal moment that pushes you over the edge where you know you have to make a change. I know for me, when I was working as a professional storyteller in the nonprofit world, uh, I was going on for 20 years, and then one day a teacher hired me, and just before I hung up the phone, she said to me, "I'll book you after the snake eye and before the magician." And I suddenly realized that was my relevance, that I was after the snake eye and before the magician. In other words, content didn't matter. It was one more body. And it pushed me over the edge to make a change, which I did, thank God. And I think the same thing has happened with our guest today, Julia Riseman, who is the founder of Riseman. It's the Riseman Institute or
Oh,
Corporation?
Riseman Consulting.
Reisman Consulting. Um,
Mhm.
Julia, really, I'm so excited to have you here and talk to you. I'll just tell my viewers a little bit about you. Julia is a consultant in the nonprofit world. And I guess that means she does everything from strategic planning to fundraising to helping them figure out all sorts of things about their organizations. And she has done this for decades. And you also, Julia,
Mhm.
had an interesting pivotal moment that changed the whole trajectory of what you did. And I thought this would be a great place for us to start. So, first of all, welcome, Julia. I'm very, very interested to hear about your world as a consultant in the nonprofit world and what happened.
Right. Thank you. And what an honor to be in this setting, having this conversation. And I just want to acknowledge that my story is probably a lot like the stories of many of the listeners. Um, so I don't think it's unique, but I do think it's interesting how you can take a curiosity and follow a path and see your way through it. So I do consulting work with nonprofit organizations. I help them with strategic planning. I've been doing this 30 times over with all kinds of organizations across the US and Canada. And it was during the pandemic, uh, like many of us, those worried, anxious moments in the middle of the night when you just can't sleep and you're thinking about the world's biggest problems and what am I going to do about it? That was me realizing that as I was helping mission driven organizations plan for the future, not once did we connect the dots between what that organization was aiming to do and how they were thinking about the future and a larger context of what's happening to our globe around the climate crisis, knowing that a changed climate is threatening the viability of life for every living thing on this planet. And I'm worrying late at night and realizing I have the skills to help organizations plan for the future, not just for the issues they're facing today or tomorrow, but like how do we be sustainable forever? And if we don't connect the dots between why are we doing this work for our mission and why are we doing this work to ensure the livability of this planet, then I'm not proud of my work ultimately. And I'm not proud of what I'm handing to the next generation.
I'm so curious because I can imagine that many nonprofit organizations have other issues which they consider much more pending, right? I'm
Right.
guessing, I'm picturing the work I used to do where they were always worried, how are we going to pay for the toilet paper? How are we going to pay for the staff member? What are we going to do to raise money? So I would think I can imagine in my mind that they think that climate change is sort of this extracurricular thing that they'll get to after they get to everything else. And I don't know if you can change that mindset or if you find you run into that problem at all.
Oh, you're absolutely right. What's urgently important feels like the thing that we have to answer to right now. And that's true for all, not just nonprofits, but for profit businesses. It's probably true for our families and just waking up every morning. What's right in front of us feels like the thing we have to address. And what's so interesting is there are social scientists who've unpacked this and figured out what gets in the way of taking action on the climate. And there's two primary things. And that what you're talking about right there is that psychological distance. Like the thing that's right in front of me that feels urgently important is not the climate. The climate feels distant, far away in time and space. And so psychological distance makes talking about the climate or having climate conversations not feel urgently important to do right now. And the second piece of psychological research here is something called solution aversion. Even if I was invited to think about the climate in light of my organization, right? And if I withheld judgment for just a moment of like, this isn't on my priority list, how can you possibly ask me to think about that? To get beyond that, the second thing is our brains quickly go to solutions, problem solving. And solution aversion is the assumption that any solution I can think of is going to be expensive, costly, hard to do, and also against my values or somehow going to be painful or contrary to my well-being. This
Why
idea
is
that
that
like
the
it's
natural?
going to
Why is
take
that?
a lot of money to solve this problem and we don't have a lot of money
Yeah.
or our
What,
mission is to help people with disabilities. It's not to deal with the climate,
yeah.
right? So this disconnect immediately before we've even had a generative conversation about the climate to jump to this isn't going to work.
Well, like, why is that the default mode? Why is no always the default mode in a nonprofit?
Well, it's not the nonprofit. It's actually hardwired in our brains, right? This capacity to feel overwhelmed quickly. And you add on to that, the way in which we've taken information about the climate is somehow it's out of reach, it's out of our control, it's overwhelming, and it fills us with dread. So we're triggering a conversation where we're already starting from dread. And our defense mechanism, remember fear, flight, freeze, is kicked in the moment we start these conversations. So, how can we have a generative, hopeful conversation in the context of the things we care about most that helps us to break through the barriers of somehow the climate is far away and isn't a problem for us? And anything I can think of that would help our organization is going to be hard to do, expensive, and contrary to our organization's mission.
But I mean, so you must have to you have to sidestep people into it. I'm sure if you just make that a prime mandate, they'll resist. So are there strategies that you like, will you try to introduce it, by the way, on the side for the other work you're doing? How do you ease nonprofits who really had no interest in thinking about the climate to think about it?
Wow, that's such a good question. And the answer is multitudes of approaches. One is, first of all, you're going to learn I'm an incredibly optimistic and positive person. So one approach I take is to never give up on the possibility that this could be incorporated in our conversation and work together. And the other one is to start with the premise of strategic planning. So going back to my roots of helping organizations plan for the future, we can incorporate a climate conversation into strategic planning because the purpose of strategic planning is to help organizations be really clear about why they exist, what they're here for, where they're going, and how they imagine they're going to get there. And all I'm doing in these days is to think about the context in which where are we going and how do we show up for our mission in the context of a changing world, and in this case, a changing climate.
So, yeah, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you have like some concrete examples? I know you worked with a theater company, for example, which, I wouldn't imagine like a theater company. How are you going to, I really would love to know, like, what are some of the things that we're not thinking about climate wise that we should be or could be?
Right. So, in the case of a theater company, and this is a theater company that works with individuals with disabilities and putting them on center stage, right? So allowing people with disabilities to thrive and express themselves fully and be valued, and the audience transformation of seeing people with disabilities in the spotlight. So one of the things that they are trying to figure out is how to do this work on a bigger stage or to involve more actors, and then how to build this program to be sustainable for the long run. What does that have to do with the climate? Well, when they started to have a generative conversation about both how do we be responsive to planning for the future and for our artists, and families realizing that the next time there's a storm or there's a crisis, they want to make sure that these individuals can be climate resilient and know that they have a strong community. They have a network of friends they can reach out to. They can call each other after a big storm and make sure everybody's safe and okay. And when you know in advance proactively that you're going to be held in okay, you're going to be far more able to bounce back in the, when there's a big storm, and there will be a big storm, right? There will be the next, heat wave. And these actors and these communities and these families know that if there's a heat wave and they can't afford cooling, that they're going to pick each other up and go to a cool place to hang out. So that's something they had never considered before. And what ended up happening is by being proactive and reaching out to each other, and they helped even coalesce a stronger sense of troop, a stronger sense of we're here on stage to do great work, a stronger sense of mission and purpose, because they know they've got each other's backs. That's brilliant. And we can all do that. Like, there is no reason why we have to leave behind the most vulnerable people in our communities the next time the climate does something weird at us.
It's interesting. I was reading a book by a neuroscientist. I mean, they said that the brain, obviously our brains are kind of not fully evolved yet, and we've come along in so many ways, but we still have residue from that kind of like brain that developed long ago. And one of the, I guess they call it brain bugs, if you will, is that if we're offered, for example, $5 now or $10 in 2 weeks, we'll take the $5 now. That we purposely are designed to not be able to think too far ahead, because our survival when our brains were developing was really dependent on now. And I'm sure that even though we know intellectually that a storm is coming, I could imagine getting people to envision what could be is such a daunting challenge. And I know when I work as a consultant in companies using storytelling, I have to kind of try to activate certain emotional regions of the brain in order to get to it. Like sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's joy. But I was just wondering if you also are struggling with, are you using kind of any emotional strategies or triggers to get people to picture what is right now only in their brain and not in their heart?
Wow, you ended that sentence differently than I thought you would, which is I thought you were going to say that's in their heart, but not their brain. Right? Because I think we're carrying around a lot of dread and worry and concern that we haven't sort of moved up and out of and into. So what am I going to do about it? Right. So you heard my story during the pandemic. I was worried and concerned. And there was a moment of transference to like, okay, so what am I going to do about it? So for me, part of this moment when I work with organizations is that they know they need to plan for the future and they need to figure out what their goals are. They need to figure out like, where are we taking this organization? How do we solve a problem? And my goal is to say, your problem is this, but it's also this. And if you look at the next generation, the Gen Zers, they are not interested in working for your organization if it is not connected to the why. If it is
I love
not
that.
connected to their heart. And if it's this feeling of like, you just want me to show up and do your work, but I'm telling you it's BS if you're not thinking about the things that are really important. How are we going to have livable wages? How are we going to make sure we have a livable planet? And if you can't connect the dots between people's hearts and minds and move from inaction to action, there's a generation that's going to be like, I could go put my time and energy someplace else.
So
Thank you very much.
Actually, you make a very compelling HR argument, right? Staffing.
Yes.
Yeah, it's fascinating. What is a green mission statement?
Right. So that's another tool I'm using. So in that process of coming up with a strategic plan, where are we going? How are we going to get there? A lot of organizations work on a mission statement, a vision statement, value statements that then drive decision making. If we know who we are and where we're going, then our goals need to drive us towards our future vision. How do we know if it's working? Those are the outcome measures. So I'm incorporating a mission, a vision, a values, and a green mission statement, that overarching sense of um, it's your mission statement retold from a sustainability lens. It doesn't replace your mission statement, it augments it, right? So the green mission statement restates your purpose and who you serve and where you're going with this. And what does that mean for sustainability? What will you commit to doing? And so I've worked with organizations that have done these green mission statements, and then they build in a process to implement it where they check in every year and they celebrate what they've accomplished. They set themselves some commitments that they hold themselves accountable to do in the next year. And they keep active and alive this dream list for the future when we can get to it, right? So we don't have to be perfect. And we also don't have to do green or sustainability as a one and done. Something that we're going to have to keep picking away at. But that a sense of building in a process by which we can identify, why are we doing this? How does it support our mission? And then what will we do and how will we hold ourselves accountable? So,
yeah, it's really fascinating. Now, I know you're personally, it certainly says so in your bio on your website that you are Quaker. And I'm so curious how your Quakerism informed your decision to do this or fuels your life work in general. Does it affect it?
yeah. Oh, my goodness. Thank you for asking. That's a beautiful question. So I was really drawn to Quakerism from as a young adult, from this point of view that, hundreds of years beforehand in England, there was a group of people who came together and decided we are all have access to the divine. In fact, we are all have a little piece of whatever you might want to call God in us. And if that's true, then it makes no sense to justify killing one another. That we all have equality, that we are all equal in having a sense of something divine in us. And these early Quakers got rid of priests, set up worship such that anybody who was inspired to speak or felt called to speak could do so. And they utterly rejected all forms of outward violence. And that to me felt right. um, and I think that may have also driven my sense of, maybe there's something divine and special and worth saving, not just in all humans, but in all life on this planet. And if that's the case, then what we're doing to our earth and what we are pumping out in terms of burning fossil fuels, building up a climate crisis for ourselves, is something that we need to pay attention to urgently. And it's urgently important to pay attention to. So, and also the discipline in the Quaker tradition of paying attention to a calling. And if you have a calling, to act on it. And then the support of a community to say, we think that's important. But I also want to emphasize, you don't have to be a Quaker or in any particular faith group to feel like this is urgently important. I feel a lot of dread on it. And so my encouragement, or I guess my optimism, is that we all have a circle of connection to other people where we could spark a conversation about the climate that may not be having a climate conversation right now. And if we activate that in our circle of people that we spend time with, we can make progress on this climate crisis. It's the inaction that's holding us back, not action.
I think I went once to a Quaker meeting circle, and wasn't there like a lot of silence?
Yes, there's a lot of quiet in between
I,
times when people feel the courage.
I'm trying to reconcile that with like a board meeting at a nonprofit. Like, are you able to, I mean, what is that silence about? And is there kind of a metaphor that you kind of also are able to integrate in your work?
Yeah, I want to talk to you about radical listening for just a moment.
Yeah.
So quiet is not inaction. Like quiet doesn't mean nothing is happening. Quiet might mean radical listening. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what radical listening can
Well,
accomplish.
sorry, I'm laughing so hard that would be the perfect phrase to apply to any family dinner of mine. Like, you need to start applying radical listening. So I guess talking while somebody else is talking wouldn't qualify, right?
So one of the things you probably don't know, a story I can tell you, is that I befriended a woman named Dr. Kinnery Webb in college, and she wanted to figure out how to save rainforests through using by providing medical care to local communities, rainforest communities. And in exchange for providing medical care, work with those communities to stop illegal logging of the rainforest. And so she came in with a clear idea about what she wanted to do. I helped her to start a nonprofit called Health and Harmony that combined human and environmental health. What she discovered was it wasn't her ideas that stopped the illegal logging. It was her listening to local communities tell her what the issues were, and her commitment to make sure resources showed up for implementing those solutions. So farmers came to her and said, we're cutting down the rainforest because the soil's really bad here and we need to farm. But could you please teach us organic farming methods so that we can build up the soil and use the same plot of land over and over again? We wouldn't have to log the forest. Or they came up with hundreds of solutions to stop illegal logging. And so the root was radical listening, listening to local rainforest communities, and then implementing their solutions.
Wow.
And so now this work isn't just in Indonesia, it's happening in Brazil, it's happening in Madagascar, it's Doctors Without Borders is taking this up as an approach to really turning the tide on, instead of taking resources and taking resources out of our rainforests that our globe needs to survive, is putting resources back into indigenous and local communities so that they can conserve this precious resource we all need to survive. So all that to say, when looking for solutions, it's not me as a facilitator telling a nonprofit what they need to do. It's radically listening and setting up the conditions by which people can put out ideas, decide on the best ideas, implement their best ideas, and then celebrate what's working. And that's what's happening in these rainforest communities across the globe.
Wow. I mean, I imagine your Quaker, the way you've internalized your Quaker faith must also help you deal with like conflict resolution, or at least in a different way than some other consultants I've seen. No, maybe not.
Well, what different than bumping people on the head?
I've met a million consultants now that I'm in the corporate world, and a lot of them I feel like they're driven by ego. I don't feel that with you. I feel like you actually have a mission that's greater than yourself. And that's pretty rare. I mean, I've seen a million and one consultants, but I don't necessarily see that. And I have to think in part that that drives, the way you work as well with
Thank
issues like
you.
conflict. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but
No, thank you. Thank you for saying that. And, you know, um, I'm not sure I can tell you right now what the opposite of ego is, but there is ego in the work that I do, which is I would like to see us, I'd like to lift up and value the contributions of many people to solve the world's biggest problems. And so I'm just impatient for us to get going on solving this global crisis we're in. And I truly believe we need to start with every individual making their own decisions. We've got millions, billions of decision makers right now, but we haven't been activated to feel like we have any control over this big crisis. And I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true. So that's my intention. I do think there's ego in that, but I believe the solution is by lifting up the voices of others.
I mean, just in closing, because I can't believe how fast this time went by. I know you had a couple of organizations you're working with. I'd love just for you to tell viewers how, you've introduced or insinuated a green a quality to the work you're doing. Like you worked with the Northampton Community Rowing and the Greenfield Center School. These are places in Western Massachusetts. Maybe you could just articulate like things that you introduced to them, or help them
Well,
to
terrific.
understand?
Oh, let me give you a rowing club. They sit in their boats, they row on the Connecticut River. They do races, regattas. It's a community rowing club, so lots of people can join and try out rowing if they've never tried it. You would think, is that a candidate for mission? But when they realized that their boathouse was, just a tarp and a frame, was absolutely susceptible to the next, big storm coming through, they could lose everything. Erosion, the weather is changing, the number of mornings they can get out and safely row. There's a number of questions they have. It's like, what do we do? How do we replace the bait? How is it even possible for us to raise enough money to, rebuild our boathouse? But when they started to talk with me about, instead of oh my God, how are we going to, there's not enough money, we don't have enough volunteers and resources, to how might we, what are all the ways we could, when they started to think in a more generative way, they realized that they are building powerful connections and communities and building strong individuals by getting out and exercising, building community, all of which we're going to need to be climate resilient. So, I mean, there's a possibility here of transferring an argument, a concern and a worry of like it's all doom and gloom, to actually, we're doing something important here as part of that bigger why. We do community rowing for our health and well-being, and our strength of community, which we will need. And along the way, if we put out a dream of a better, bigger, stronger boathouse and bring other people along in that dream, instead of it seeming like an impossibility, it seems like oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It
Plus,
accomplishes goals for our community beyond just a few people having a nice time on the river. We need strong and able-bodied people to respond to the next crisis. So
I,
really good
I
idea
also
to have a good boathouse.
I could imagine funding sources also would really look favorably upon that kind of thinking as well now.
When we connect the dots, right? When we connect the dots to a bigger why, it brings a bigger generosity of spirit and heart to anything we're trying to do.
Yeah. What about
Right.
your school that you worked on, Greenfield Center School?
Right. The Greenfield Center School is such a sweet independent school, and they moved to a new location. They built a beautiful new school building with a very good intention around the climate. So ensuring that it was as carbon neutral as possible. For every tree that was cut down, they replanted a new tree to take in the carbon absorption that the old tree took down. They involved the children in programming, right? To think about the climate and themselves. During the pandemic, they had outdoor classrooms, which they capped when they were allowed to go back into the classroom. So they have a lot of outdoor. So that's great. This is a school that's really focusing on how do we incorporate this into our DNA. But then they took it one step further when they started to have these generative conversations of how might we. The idea that kids could come and know that they can shelter in the school if there's a climate crisis, a big storm, and parents can know that their children will be more less traumatized, right, by their house getting flooded out if they know they have a safe haven in the school. So this combination of commitment to this is what we do, this is why we do it, here's how it's connected to a bigger picture and a bigger why. That a green mission statement or thinking green doesn't have to go against your values. And here's another piece that for a lot of the local community organizations, when they did a free energy audit and found out how much money they could save by enacting some simple solutions of winterizing or moving to a cleaner energy source for heat and cooling, they saved money that they could pour back into their missions. So back to that solution inversion. If you assume it's going to be expensive and hard, but the truth is it's actually going to save you a ton of money, then we're not, if we don't put those two and two together, we miss out on the opportunity not just to reduce our carbon load that we're spitting out, but we're missing the opportunity to have resources to pour back into our missions.
I mean, I'm fascinated. I'm in. And I look forward to hearing about where you go next with this new, vision. And I have no doubt you'll be totally successful. I feel
Thank
like
you.
your energy is intoxicating, and I'm super happy that I got a chance to talk to you today. Are
Well,
you?
thank you so much for this invitation. And if there's one thing folks remember from this, it's just go out and start having climate conversations. Start from the premise that psychological distance, assuming that somehow this is far off and not relevant, is actually not true. And then the second piece, that the solutions are going to be hard and expensive. Let's counter that with the truth, which is a lot of these are going to save you money and make a difference to your
Wow.
mission.
Oh, I just got chills. Thank you so much. It was honestly a pleasure. And I wish you all the best with everything you're doing.
Thank
I
you.
can't wait to follow up and see what's happening. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.